Hi everyone, welcome to this edition of The Quick Fix. Here I promise to demystify qualitative concepts in 10 minutes or less. And don't forget, extended versions are available by request. Today we talk about positionality. We'll also talk about three related concepts: insider-outsider, access, and power. Now, what is positionality? A frequently cited definition comes from Merriam that says positionality is thus determined by where one stands in relation to the other. Positionality is essentially where you are in relation to the other people in your study, namely your participants. But before you know where you stand in relation to the other, it's important to know where you're standing right now. So I ask you, who are you? What are your beliefs, values? What's your gender, race, ethnicity, SES, education? What makes you you, and how do the aspects of you inform your work? Burke looks at positionality as identity, and not just as identity, but the perceptions and implications associated with your identity. He argues positionality is who you are, how people perceive you, and the implications of that perception. Meet Brian Burke. Well, this is what I imagine Brian Burke, the researcher, to look like. So anyway, in 2014, Brian conducted a study looking at how undergraduate students of color navigate the campus climate of a PWI in Kentucky. Namely, he's looking at how they navigate the dimensions of race. Now let's look at Brian's positionality. Brian identifies as a white, heterosexual, cisgender male from down south USA. He worked in student affairs before becoming faculty, but it was his experience in residence life that sparked this interest in understanding how students of color navigate PWI campuses. He looks at positionality from a place of identity. So going into the study, he's asking himself, how will who I am really impact my study? He's also keeping in mind that it's not just about how you see yourself, but it's also about how you're viewed by others. Positionality is like cake. Well, a layered cake. Kind of. So this is the point. There's several layers in the cake, and they can represent the dimensions of consideration when thinking about positionality. Each layer is distinct, but when you eat it, it all mixes up together. So your race, your gender, your ethnicity, how people perceive you, how you perceive them, all those are distinct, but they're all very much integrated with one another. So let's go back to Brian. Remember, he studied students of color's experience with race on a college campus. So let's take a look at the participants of his study to give us some more insight on positionality. Brian. First, we have Brad. Brad is an undergraduate white male. Next, we have Simone. Simone is an undergraduate black female. Now, what are some assumptions you make about the anticipated dynamic between Brian and his participants? What attributes do they share? What makes them different? Whose community do you think Brian most identifies with? All of these answers are built on assumptions and bring us to our first concept of insider-outsider. Insider-outsider is essentially the degree of your connection to the group you're studying. So Chavez adopted a continuum from Banks to illustrate the spectrum of insider-outsiderness. Far on the left, you've got the indigenous insider, right? That's an individual who endorses the unique values, perspectives, behaviors, beliefs, and knowledge of his or her indigenous group. And this person has the authority to speak on the topic. They were socialized in that community. On the far right, you have the external outsider. That's an individual who was socialized within a different community than the one that he or she is researching. Now, given what we just learned about insider-outsiderness, we can make assumptions about how the students may react to Brian. Brian made assumptions as well. So, with Brad, he assumed that race and gender would connect them, and that the connection would make it easier to quickly build rapport and gain valuable insight into the experiences on campus. He assumed that they treat him like an insider. With Simone, he assumed the obvious differences, race and gender, would make it more difficult to develop rapport and gain insight into her experiences. He was also concerned that he might be perceived by her and members of her focus group as an intruder. In the end, he misjudged. He expected Brad and the focus group of white undergraduate men to feel connected to him and share. Instead, his position as researcher and his views of a racialized campus climate distanced him from that group. Many of them did not see race as an issue on campus and lacked experiences to share. One student walked out. On the other hand, the females in Simone's focus group appreciated Brian's interest in their experiences and viewed him as an advocate and a person in a position to give their experiences a voice. His findings helped introduce so many different dynamics of positionality, but the two that we'll highlight right now are access and power. First, let's look at access. Access can be defined as the privileged entrance into the world of the group you're studying. Here we see that the students' perceptions of Brian granted and denied him access into the privacy and vulnerability of their experiences. Next, we look at power. Power can be considerable concern in research. Power relates to how perceptions orient behavior. This can be a sensitive topic because research can be viewed as an invasion or a presumed right to understand other cultures through subjective criticism. Lewis talks about Galton's idea of scientific colonialism, or the idea of unlimited access, which is a way that could be misguided or viewed as a misguided form of exploitation. So negotiating the power within relationships becomes important. So power and positionality. Feminist scholars attempt to address this concern by establishing a collaborative relationship with both the participants and the researcher so that they're on an equal level. And participatory action research, they attempt to mitigate the power dynamics by creating a space of the co-construction of knowledge between the researcher and the participants. This is similar to what we saw with Brian's study. So positionality is more than identity and your position or relation to others, but it's also about implications. The implications of your identity and those perceptions. Perceptions held by you and perceptions held by the participants. Now, so what? Why does positionality matter in qualitative research? For the same reasons bias, subjectivity, and reflexivity matter. It helps you become more authentic. It helps that you are now the researcher, the instrument. You can constantly consider all the moving parts that are going on simultaneously. It helps you to be aware of what's happening and enhance the integrity of your study, making it more valuable. If you're new to the idea of positionality, you may want to read a few articles that can help you understand it a bit more, because we're really just skimming the surface here. So if you look in ethnography, participatory action, critical theory, feminist, they all specifically talk about this idea of positionality. So in closing, positionality is not like cake at all. Positionality is more like, it's like juggling. right? So you have all these moving pieces, perceptions, thoughts, biases, values, all these things running along at the same time. And what you're trying to figure out is how to not drop the ball. So positionality is where you are in relation to others in the study, but it's also about the implications of you being you and the implications of your interactions with others. Clear? I hope so. Thank you for watching this. Thank you for watching this edition of the Qual Crash Course. Feel free to leave questions below.